If goodness has a recipe, what are its ingredients? Is there a hidden structure underneath everything good? Let's consider. Hello philosophers, I'm Chico. Welcome to the Philosopher Channel summary of the Summa Theologica. Today we're in Prima Pars question 5, article 5. Whether the essence of goodness consists in mode, species, and order. This is a question really about the structure of goodness. If you have a good thing, which everything is in some sense good, he has already said, what are the things that make it good? Remember, we're not talking specifically about moral goodness here. This is more ontological goodness, desirability. Before we get into the actual article itself, let's go over a few terms. The first one is mode. Mode refers to the measure or limitation of a thing. Think of it as the how and how much of a thing's existence. Every created thing exists in a certain way, within certain boundaries. A cup of water has a certain volume, a certain temperature, a certain purity. These are its modes. In metaphysical terms, mode is the determination or proportion of a thing's underlying principles, its matter and efficient cause, that must be in place before it can receive its form. Think of it like a builder measuring and cutting wood before he actually makes a house. The measurements are the mode, and without them, the form, the house itself, could not come into being. Then let's look at the term species. We're not talking about the biological use of this term species. In scholastic philosophy, species is the kind of a thing that something is, and that is determined by its form. The form of a dog makes it a dog. The form of an oak tree makes it an oak tree. The rational soul, being the form of a human being, makes a human being a human being. So species is the what of a thing, its essential nature. The answer to the question, what kind of a thing is this? And then order. Order refers to the inclination or tendency of a thing towards its proper end or goal. So every being, once it has form, naturally tends towards certain activities and purposes that flow from that form. So, for example, a fire tends towards heating. An acorn tends towards becoming an oak tree. A human intellect tends towards truth. This directedness is the order of a thing. Sometimes this is called the weight of a thing as well. And that's because just as the physical weight of a thing pulls it towards some other body, especially the ground, the metaphysical weight of a thing pulls it towards its end. And then finally, we've already talked about what a form is, but let's review it really quickly. First, form is not just the shape of a thing. It's the metaphysical principle of a thing that makes it what it is. The soul, for example, is the form of the living body. The organized structure of a molecule is its form. So when Aquinas says that everything is what it is by its form, he means that the form is the source of a thing's identity, nature, and activity. Now, this entire article is going to rest on an argument that relates mode, species, and order to form. The mode precedes the form, the species is the form, and order follows from the form. All that we'll have to do then is to recall that form is tied directly to goodness, and we'll be able to conclude that mode, species, and order are intimately tied to the goodness of a thing as well. So, the question, whether the essence of goodness consists in mode, species, and order, Aquinas says yes. He says that these three things, mode, species, and order, as common goods, are in everything God has made. So in other words, everything has mode, species, and order. 2, where these things abound, the things are very good. Where they are less, the things are less good. And where they do not exist at all, there can be nothing good. And Aquinas gets that from Augustine's On the Nature of the Good. 3, this would not be unless goodness consisted in these things. 4, therefore the essence of goodness is mode, species, and order. Okay, let's look at his argument. Premise 1. A thing is desirable insofar as it is perfect. And this he gets from article 1 of question 5. If you don't recall, you can go ahead and check that video out again. 2, a thing is good insofar as it is desirable. And again, that's from article 1. 3, so a thing is good insofar as it is perfect, and that follows directly from 1 and 2. 4, a thing is said to be perfect if it lacks nothing according to the mode of its perfection. Again, remember, perfection here does not mean some impossible ideal or something like that. It means a completeness. So a thing is complete if it has everything it's supposed to have. A knife, let's say, is perfect if it has a sharp edge, a good handle, a proper balance. A perfect oak tree would be one that is tall and sturdy, has lots of leaves, deep roots. But you wouldn't say that an oak tree is not perfect because it does not have a sharp edge, or that a knife is not perfect because it doesn't have deep roots. Now 5, everything is what it is by its form. Again, the form is just the principle of a thing that makes it what it is. 6, the form presupposes certain things, and 7, from the form certain things necessarily flow. So again, here's where we're going to connect form to mode, species, and order, and because form is connected to goodness, mode, species, and order are going to be connected to goodness. So just so you know the way the argument's about to work, form presupposes certain things, that's going to be the mode. From the form certain things flow, that's going to be order. And then form just is species. So we're going to have mode, species, and order, all those three things connected to form. And that's what Proposition 8 says. That is, for a thing to be perfect and good, it must have form together with all that precedes the form and follows upon the form. So let's start with presupposes. 9, the form presupposes determination or commensuration of its principles, whether material or efficient. Commensuration here means proper proportion or fitting together. Before the form can be present, the underlying principles must be properly proportioned. So for example, for a living body, the organs must be properly disposed. For a house, the materials must be the right shape and size. But of course, that's just the material stuff, right? The material cause. We also are talking about the efficient cause, the builder of the house. You need to have both of those things before it can receive its form. 10, this is signified by the mode. This determination or commensuration of the principles of a form. That is what the mode is. Mode just means the measure, the limitation, the proper proportion of a thing's underlying principles. So that's what's presupposed by the form, the mode. Now what about the form itself, the species? 12, everything is placed in its species by its form. Again, the form is what makes it the kind of a thing that it is, and that's just what the species is. 13, so the form itself is signified by the species. And then we have this little section in here about number. A unit added to or taken from a number changes the species of that number. And by species here, we just mean what number you're talking about. So like, let's say you started with the number 7. A unit added to 7 would give you 8. A unit taken away from the number would give you 6. 15, in the same way, a difference added to or taken from a definition changes the species. So you kind of have to know what a definition is in Aristotle's view. That is a genus plus a difference. So for example, if you're trying to define what a human is, the genus of a human would be animal, but there are lots of different kinds of animals. So what makes a human this specific kind of an animal? Well, it's the difference. What is different about this type of animal from all the other types of animal? And in Aristotle's view, that would be that it's rational. So rational animal, that is the difference and the genus put together. That gives you the definition. But now let's say you added something to that definition. Let's say you added winged rational animal. Well, adding to that definition would change the species. No, you're no longer talking about a human being. Or let's say you take something away, you take away the rational part. Well, now you're just talking about animals in general. So just like in the case of number, if you add to or take away from the definition, you change the species. 16, so definitions signifying species are like numbers. 17, hence, the number is said to give the species. Okay, so now we have mode and species, that which precedes the form, that which is the form. Now let's talk about what follows from the form. Upon the form follows an inclination to the end or to an action or something of this sort. In other words, based on what the form of a thing is, that will dictate the kinds of goals or ends or actions that this thing takes. So based on the form of an acorn, it's going to tend towards becoming an oak tree, not a bicycle. Based on the form of a ball, it's going to tend towards the ground and not towards the sky when you drop it. Based on the form of a human being, namely its rational soul, it's going to tend towards truth. 19. For everything, insofar as it is an act, acts and tends towards that which is in accordance to its form. This is actually just a support for 18. I really should have swapped these two around, but that's okay. We'll leave it that way. 20. This belongs to weight and order. So in other words, this tending towards something, that's what we mean when we say order or weight. And so there we have it, mode, species, and order. The thing that precedes the form, the thing that is the form, the thing that follows from the form. And 21, therefore, the essence of goodness consists in those things, mode, species, and order. Now let's look at some objections. Objection 1, goodness and being differ logically. This is something we saw in Article 1 as well. Goodness and being are actually the same thing, but they differ just logically. 2 comes from the Book of Wisdom, 11:21. Thou hast ordered all things in measure, in number, and in weight. And by the way, the Book of Wisdom does not occur in the Jewish Bible. It does not occur in the Protestant Bible. The Catholics and the Orthodox have the Book of Wisdom. 3, and this comes from Augustine, measure fixes the mode of everything, number gives it its species, like we saw, and weight gives it rest and stability. 4. So mode, species, and order are taken from measure, number, and weight. And those things belong to all things. And as they belong to all things, they belong to the nature of being. So the essence of goodness does not consist in mode, species, and order. Again, as we said, because being and goodness differ logically. Here's Aquinas' response. Sure, mode, species, and order belong to a thing's being, but not just to a being in any sense. They belong to a being insofar as it is perfect. In other words, insofar as it lacks nothing. And being as perfect is exactly the same thing as being as good. So it is the case that we're talking about goodness when we're talking about mode, species, and order. Objection 2. Mode, species, and order are things that are good themselves. Therefore, if the essence of goodness consists in mode, species, and order, then every mode must have its own mode, species, and order. And the same thing can be said for species and for order. Every species would have its own mode, species, order. Every order would have its own mode, species, order. But then, of course, you can see how an infinite regress would start to happen, because then those new mode, species, and orders would have to have their mode, species, and orders, and those new mode, species, and orders would have to have their own mode, species, and orders, so on and so forth. So Aquinas' reply is this. Mode, species, and order are said to be good and to be beings, not as though they themselves were subsistences, but because it is through them that other things are being and are good. Mode, species, and order are spoken of as good, not as though formally constituted so by something else, but as formally constituting other things good. So they don't need other things to make them good. A subsistent thing is a thing that exists in its own right, it can stand apart by itself. He says mode, species, and order are not things like that. So when we call them good, we're not calling them good like we would call, let's say, an oak tree good. In fact, he gives an example of whiteness. We say whiteness is, meaning like whiteness is a being. But whiteness does not exist by virtue of some other principle of existence. It is the principle by which other things are white. So in other words, we don't need some other whiteness to make white the color that it is. White just is that color. Another possibly helpful example, we don't call a sandwich healthy because it can run a mile in 5 minutes and has good blood pressure. We call a sandwich healthy because it makes people healthy. And then people can run a mile in 5 minutes or have good blood pressure. So people require the sandwich to make them healthy. The sandwich doesn't require something else to make it healthy. Objection 3. Evil is the privation of mode, species, and order. But evil is not the total absence of goodness. This is something we saw before. The fact that a thing exists just necessarily makes it good. Not morally good necessarily, but good in the sense of desirable. And evil is the privation of some goodness. So a thing should be a particular way, and it's not quite that way. We call this little absence there, we call that evil. But the part of it that is there is good. And if there was nothing there, right? If there was total absence of a thing, that would be pure evil, but then that's nothing, right? That's a total lack of anything is nothing at all. So the objection here is saying that if mode, species, and order are totally lacking from an evil thing, and yet goodness is not totally lacking from an evil thing, then mode, species, and order must not be the same as goodness. Aquinas replies, 1, every being is due to some form. 2, so, according to every being of a thing, is its mode, species, and order. In other words, it's not the case that an evil thing is totally lacking all mode, species, and order. In order just to be, you need mode, species, and order. And then he says, a man has mode, species, and order insofar as he is white, virtuous, learned, and so on according to everything predicated of him. In other words, all of those different attributes that a thing has, all of those things are due to mode, species, and order. So you have really like overlapping mode, species, and orders. Now, evil does deprive a thing of mode, species, and order, the same way that blindness deprives a man of sight. But it doesn't destroy all mode, species, and order, right? The blind man still has some mode, species, and order, even though he's missing something because he's blind. And that's really the same thing we could say about goodness. That lack of sight, that deprivation, that's an evil, and that's also a lack of mode, species, and order. So we don't have to say that they're two different things. Objection 4. That wherein consists the essence of goodness cannot be spoken of as evil. In other words, you can't call goodness evil. And this is because that would just be a contradiction. Right, you would be saying goodness is evil. 2, but we can speak evil of mode, species, and order. We can say that there is such a thing as evil. I'm not sure about species, but evil mode and evil order. You can say that there is an evil mode. So a corrupt practice, for example, has an evil mode of operation. Or an evil order would be something like a tyrant's regime. Therefore, goodness can't consist in mode, species, and order. His reply he gets from Augustine, every mode as mode is good. And then he says we can say the same thing about species and order. 2, But an evil mode, species, and order are so called by being less than they ought to be, or as not belonging to that which they ought to belong to. So, for example, a cancerous tumor. Cancerous tumor has mode, species, and order, and that just makes it a being, which makes it good, but it's not the right kind of mode, species, and order, right? What makes it evil is that it is actually a corruption of healthy tissue. So the evil is not in the mode, species, and order itself. It's that these mode, species, and order are less than they should be given the nature of the thing, or that they're present where they shouldn't be. And finally, objection 5. Mode, species, and order are caused by weight, number, and measure, as Augustine has said. But Ambrose says, it is of the nature of light not to have been created in number, weight, and measure. But of course, we would all say that light is good, so not everything that is good has number, weight, and measure, so not everything that is good has mode, species, and order. Now, this view of light follows from a particular medieval cosmology that is out of date. Light was thought to be the active quality of the highest celestial body, the heavens. So it seemed to transcend ordinary measurement. And even today we have trouble with it. Is it a particle or a wave? Let's look at Aquinas' response, even though the cosmology isn't there anymore. Let's see if he has a good response. Light is an active quality of the first body that causes change, namely the heavens. 2, so the power of light extends to all corporeal things. 3, so the nature of light is spoken of as being without weight, number, and measure. Not absolutely, but in comparison with corporeal things. In other words, saying that light is without weight, number, and measure is like saying a multi-billionaire has immeasurable wealth. Is it immeasurable wealth? Not technically speaking, that's more hyperbolic. That is saying compared to other people's wealth, it is immeasurable. Again, by the way, don't forget that weight here does not mean weight like on a scale. This is metaphysical weight. This is that ordering towards a particular end or action. So particles of light, photons, they have some kind of end, right? They act in a particular way. They always act in that kind of a way. We're not saying that a photon is so many grams heavy. And that's it for this article. In the next article, Aquinas asks how goodness is divided. We all know there are different kinds of good things. A good meal, a good friend, a good deed. Are they all good in the same way? Aquinas is going to introduce a famous threefold division of goodness that goes back to Aristotle. First, we have the virtuous, that which is good in itself. Then the useful, that which is good as a means to an end. Then the pleasurable, that which is good insofar as it satisfies some desire. How do these three relate to each other? And which one is the most fundamental? You'll have to stick around for Article 6. So don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, hit the notification bell so you'll know when Article 6 drops. I'll see you in Article 6. Adios.